We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 Hello, everybody, and welcome out there in Autism land to Autistic Radio. It's a time where a group of autistic people get together, discuss their lives, how autism presents to them individually. It won't cover everybody who's autistic, but you'll probably find some value in the shared experience there. So we're going to look at the first post. It's from NDWise Hub, an AUDHD advocate, parent, article writer and resource creator who focuses on safety in communication and agency in ways that honour the neurodivergent experience. The post reads, "When we look at context only as background noise, we miss the point that it actively shapes communication and that it is volatile. What is safe in one space can feel impossible in another. What makes perfect sense in one relationship can be misunderstood in another, even when the words are the same. This fragility of context is the reason for many breakdowns in understanding, because social systems assume that context is stable, shared, and mutually understood, but regrettably, it rarely is. Let's start by looking at the assumption of shared meaning. Most environments operate on implicit expectations. The trouble is that these assumptions depend on shared cultural and sensory baselines which are neuronormative. When communication styles differ, the contextual cues that people rely on to interpret the meaning become unreliable. In other words, the same behaviour carries different meanings depending on who is interpreting it and under what conditions. When those interpretive frameworks are undiscussed, misunderstanding becomes systemic rather than situational."
This is a large piece of text and exemplifies in its sense probably the first paragraph, which is dealing with context, volatile communication, the misunderstandings. So what are we to take from this text? Is it autistic related? I'm just going to reflect back on being autistic and how we handle communication, how we relate to it, the context that it operates within for us, whether that be, as it says in the text, workplaces, classrooms and services, challenges to effort or motivation and the environmental mismatch. Yeah, again, it's like somebody's style of language as well can be a wee bit of a barrier to understanding the way text is put together.
It's a difficult piece of text. Let me try and see what I'm finding in it. It says at the beginning, it says, if we look at the context of what somebody is trying to communicate only as the background noise and we ignore it, then we're missing the point that the context in which we speak actually is part of the communication. It changes the meaning of what is said. The words mean something different in a different context. It also says that because people don't think of the context the words are said in, it creates a breakdown in the communication between people. If it's assumed that the context hasn't changed, the context is a stable thing, rather than the context of our lives are things that are always moving and always shifting, our mood, everything changes, then what is being said is not really being received. There are assumptions made about our words. There's an assumption of shared meaning. The way that I say a sentence, I assume people are going to understand those words in the way that I mean them. And I'm sure that they feel when they put a sentence back to me, that's what's happening for them. A sentence means a sentence. But the poster seems to be saying the reality is that the same sentence in a different context means something completely different. And if most people are using the same kind of framework, the same kind of context to put those words in and understand those words in, then there's a kind of agreement that happens of what words mean. However, the person actually saying those words might not be part of that agreement of how the context works. If it's a neurotypical framework, then it's going to be misunderstood. Does that make any kind of dent on this?
Yeah, briefly, that explains why communication would not work, because there are regulatory frameworks to conform to. I think what's also being hinted at here is there's a shared understanding. It's not just in shared meaning or shared use of words, but a shared relationship of context. You and I may go into a situation in a place saying different things, totally at cross purposes, I think is a cliche or idiom. But yet, we do share a situation of communication, even if it's miscommunication. So something goes on there where people get out of their frames and contexts and see the larger picture. And I think that is being pointed at as an autistic or neurodivergent experience.
It seems to me that what they're asking for is for people to consider the context that somebody is speaking within. They're asking people to not assume that a sentence means the sentence that they are used to it meaning, because if they try to imagine themselves a little bit more about the person and where they're coming from, what their experience has been prior to that or around that, then those words should have a different meaning to them. So there's an assumption that kind of misses communication, because communication is much bigger than the words.
Yes, and I think it works both ways. So it's what the neurodivergent person is communicating in this changing situation or context, but also what they're perceiving anyone else in the conversation as having said and what it means. And I think it would help to readers and people in these situations who are not neurodivergent that it happens in ways to us all, perhaps just somehow more to the neurodivergent person. So if you're not well one day, but you're in the same context that you usually communicate your words clearly and understand the others clearly, or just using an example, if somebody ate the wrong thing for lunch, it can throw things off in very important situations. I don't know, if a judge in a court ate the wrong thing for lunch and then is communicating an important ruling, is it different?
Yeah, and there's that thing of, refusing food, or the communication of laying down a table for someone, and your reaction to that event and food can be upsetting to whoever has done this, who is hosting you in that situation.
I think I'm getting a bit more of a handle on it reading the next paragraph. We also need to recognise the fact that context is not only social but sensory. Competing stimuli can drastically affect processing speed, regulation, feeling safe, and communication. Yet environments rarely account for this variability. Systems interpret performance as consistent. For example, if someone can communicate clearly once, they should be able to do it every time. When this doesn't happen, the assumption is inconsistency or lack of reliability. The fact is that this inconsistency is not within the person, it's the environment that's changed. The context has changed. Context fragility here means that the body's sensory load directly influences cognitive and relational functioning. Without recognizing this, then workplaces, classrooms and services misattribute regulation challenges to effort or motivation rather than environmental mismatch. So now I'm starting to understand a bit of this. If we are in a changed environment that affects us, but it doesn't affect or change the people around us, it's assumed that there's some failing within us. Whereas we might not be able to explain that we can't communicate in the same way that we could before because there's something that's tapping and irritating us, or something that is taking up our space, or something that makes it impossible to be the same person. However, outwardly, we look as though we're the same person. So why aren't we behaving exactly the same as we were before? There's an unseen effect on us that other people aren't seeing.
Here's where I think it's useful. I'm not sure who's supposed to be reading this, but I'll use an example in a situation. Let's say it's a lights, camera, action situation where somebody's been prepped for, I don't know, some sort of public inquiry, let's say. They were fine when they were in a little that was quiet, that was just, 3 people they trust. And then they're thrown into this larger public forum, perhaps with glaring lights and just a lot of background noise, competing conversations, and people of all different, authorities. And then there they are. They're supposed to give some information. Everybody is staring at them. They're feeling that people don't realize the effect of the entire context, the type of lights, the different noises. So it would be helpful if people of some who were experiencing this, I'm just going to use court again as an example. If people like judges, lawyers, media, the gallery, the audience, whoever, were somehow taught that if it were boiling hot in there, the air conditioning broke, or the windows were broken and the air was coming in, or if the lights were just ridiculous and flashing, that they too would lose their train of thought or lose their ability to hear and interpret other people. I somehow think that it's the lack of the people around to understand, and that this writer was trying to relay that in a thorough and thoughtful way. Examples would have helped contextualize.
So we're moving to Mike's Neurodivergent Toolbox. Mike is from the United States, a late diagnosed autistic person who continues to struggle with a lifetime of unaddressed disabilities. But I hope that my efforts provide help and understanding to others with similar stories. Mike writes, I make this point often, but here I'll provide some fleshed out details. There is no one correct way to be autistic or neurodivergent. This is one of my main themes, especially as I came to the conversation late in life. And in each of the items I mention, there are good neurodivergent reasons for being one way or the other, or somewhere in the middle. Some of us are picky eaters, and some of us are adventurous ones. Some of us thrive in clutter, and some of us are neatniks. Similarly, some of us are pack rats, and some are minimalists. Some of us have a flamboyant physical presentation with bold hair colourings, tattoos, piercings and such, and others prefer to be understated in their appearance. Some of us are morning people, some are night owls. Some of us prefer another neurodiverse partner, some an NT one, some take it on a case-by-case basis or have no desire to have a partner. Some of us are very religious, some are not. The same applies to political leanings. Some of us would rather go with the flow because doing so produces less anxiety. Some, however, are very outspoken and contrarian. I could provide many more examples, and unless someone is advocating something that is against our interests, any of the above is totally okay with me. If being one way or another doesn't interrupt my life, I always respect and embrace differences.
I found it interesting that Mike, in his second sentence, says there is no one correct way to be autistic. Every once in a while, it even happens when we're in conversation that we ask ourselves in the context of this group. Let's use a different example than one that Mike uses, like whether we make eye contact or not, for example. No matter how we understand that we are neurodivergent, we do realize that there's a bit of a, top 10 list of ways to be, sort of like a checklist. And then it causes us to wonder if we're the right kind of autistic, or if we even are autistic or something. And I feel for Mike that it is something that perhaps because he was diagnosed late in life, and some of us here have been too, that we're struggling with, like this thing people tend to refer to these days as imposter syndrome.
I think we all react to what we've heard and what we learn and what we read, given that we might have curiosities once we, approach diagnosis and receive it. I think what the poster's hinting at here is variability is one of the better options in understanding your way through these things. There are so many things. There are middle grounds to most of these binary contrasts he's produced as a list. We could get into them in detail because some of them concern us and some don't. Some are triggering to some of us, because we have things we'd rather avoid or not really be participating in. It's a big world and there's a lot of difference out there, and variability is difference. So I say open your eyes and take it all in. But as Teresa points out, there are lists and there are traits that are reinforced by a culture. And I would always say question that.
I would say you don't have to be A, you don't have to be B, you don't have to be C. Just be yourself, be the best version of yourself. Take that to the world.
Yeah, it reminds me of this idea of what do we want, what do I want, and then what do we want? Because very often there's a question implicit in what everybody's discussing online in the community. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is that you have to know what you want in order to live your life, to be who you are. Of course, we always look for guidance and influence, and we are affected by our environments and other people. But to get to that point where you are the most important thing, it's your life, you go out and live it, that is a difficult one for a lot of people, given that there may have been decades, say, of a kind of dependency on various things. I know how much a struggle that can be at times. So whether somebody is a picky eater or an adventurous one, or has just decided that in their best interests they will study nutrition like a good pattern seeker, and they will do their best.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you're late diagnosed because you've lived a life. If you take the picky eater, I was a child, I was a picky eater. My parents dealt with it very well, and gradually throughout my life I've added more and more foods until I would say I was somebody that eats an enormous range of foods that people would say, well, that's not an autistic way of eating. And there are so many of these things that if you are late diagnosed, you have adapted yourself to and perhaps even found suit you. Things that were natural to you when you were a child have been replaced with a different thing that is now natural to you. It's natural to me to eat lots of healthy green vegetables that are lightly steamed. As a child, not so much. Change is possible. Neuroplasticity, as we discussed in a podcast with somebody who had actually had a brain tumour, a neurodivergent lady from Israel. We are changing. The brain adapts and changes to circumstances, not just in negative ways through trauma, but also in positive ways through positive experience. There is always a difficulty, though, because autism has been defined by other people. And now autistic people are attempting more and more to define autism themselves. as neurodivergence, for instance, instead of, an autistic impairment or an autistic disability. People are now trying to live in a space where, yes, they're autistic, but they're living full lives. They're adapting their lives and adapting to their natural parts and also acquiring additional things on top of that. So Mike does a good thing here. He points out that you cannot go to a checklist of deficits and say, you must be autistic because you have all of these deficits. It's important not to be overwhelmed by other people's opinion of what autism is or what autism isn't. And that, to some degree, includes the rest of the autistic community as well. I've come across many people who say I should be a different person if I'm autistic. Well, no, I'm quite happy being myself and autistic, thank you.
The next post is by Jordan James, the autistic photographer, who is autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, and generally neurodivergent. A photographer, parent, husband, advocate, neurodivergent, and host of the Neurodivergent Experience podcast. He's also a motivational speaker. And there's a picture of him with a very large trophy and another person, another man. My son and I, both neurodivergent, have braved the train and London's busy streets to go to Stamford Bridge for a Legends game. It's never easy being in such a busy place, but I'd do anything for my son, and this photo with the was the perfect moment. Heart eye emoji.
It's a great image, isn't it? You've got two people, dad and son. The dad knows that it was going to be tricky for him to go down on the train and visit the city, but he made that effort for his son, and there he was. He'll always have that photograph to treasure in the future. And that's what we do for our kids, whether we're autistic or not autistic.
Stamford Bridge, as well as being a historical point of reference, is also the home ground of Chelsea Football Club, which is on the father's blue football shirt. Legends, I imagine, must have been a game involving people deemed legendary by Chelsea Football Club, a London football club, soccer club. The Champions League trophy was won by Chelsea FC, so this is often part of fandom. You go and see these legendary trophies from events that mean a lot to people who respond to these sporting occasions and the community it brings to certain people.
I wonder if it's one of either the father or the son's special interests, or that's just a fleeting thought. But my thought is like what Jules said. It's a wonderful memory, this photograph, and the memory of Jordan James, and the things that I have done with my neurodivergent children in their lives. And now that they're grown and gone, I think to myself sometimes, how did I ever do those things? I could never do those things. But putting myself back in the memory of things like certain concerts or advocating for them, or this one time my daughter insisted I go to a party with all of the high school graduate parents, which I had never done before. It's a memory that I could have gotten no other way.
I think the other way of looking at it is, if you're not autistic and you want to understand the kind of passion that we have for some of the subjects, then football, or following a football team, a soccer team here in the UK, or maybe your American football team, more hockey team, that kind of passion kind of explains the passion that a special interest, as they call it, might be for an autistic kid into the stereotype of trains or dinosaurs, or something like butterflies, or a particular piece of literature, or something unusual. We always pick out the trains and dinosaurs for children, but children get specially interested in and get a passion for all kinds of things. And maybe the way to explain that to a non-autistic person is the way you have a passion for your team, Chelsea.
I think for the special interests like butterflies, people don't have to experience going into this setting, like going to Stamford Bridge and being so much to get to their special interest. And it reminds me of one of our members whose special interest is a particular music group and the lengths that he has gone to participate. But I also wanted to say something about what you call your football. Around the world, football is one of the most accessible sports. And I have a friend who wrote a book called The Beautiful Game. It is a very exclusive sport. And so it's another reason I love this post and this photograph.
I want to reflect on the references made to family, because as a person who never had a family, I mean, I was born into a family, but I never raised my own family. But I do understand community and love, so I'm not denied this experience, and I can empathise with people who have raised families and felt the resonance of that experience. But I do sometimes feel that for people who have not raised a family, there are issues here of how to relate and whether or not we feel to a certain extent excluded. It's a thought I've had at various points in my life. It doesn't bother me greatly, but I just thought I would reflect on it as a person who's made it to this point in his life and not went through that experience.
I think you could have the experience with a very good friend too, especially somebody who recognizes you and encourages you to, and maybe will go with you to such an event as this one, but with your interest, or or even if it were their interest, to go with them to understand each other better.
Oh yeah, I had that experience this week where like two of my friends turned up on the same afternoon, and it was almost like too intense almost. You know, after a while I had to leave because it was like I'd been 3 hours out there with the energy of two other people who are quite intense for me. Enjoyed it immensely, but it was a burnout thing, you know, so, and they are people I share things with and people I'm very comfortable with, and I'm quite open these days, you know, kind of flexible and variable, you know, but I do know what works for me and what doesn't. And so I do understand where you can share passions. I was just reflecting a little bit on the family side.
I'd like to move on to Trauma Geek, Janae Elisabeth.
They are a researcher, storyteller, neurodiversity advocate, she, they. Janae shares current science, personal insights and stories from the journey as an autistic survivor and someone whose posts I've enjoyed immensely over the past 2 years. So the first paragraph she writes is, when I talk about the mental health villains, I'm not referring to any old thing that can harm our mental health. I'm talking about biases that influence mental health care, biases that impact whether we get help or harm from the mental health system when we go to them for help with mental health struggles. These are biases that you might want to look for in a therapist while deciding if they're the right professional for you. These biases from the therapy office trickle down to all parts of life when therapists are treated as authorities. So here is a working definition list I am using for the group I'm teaching this November-December. We will practice recognizing these, exploring how they show up in therapy and then in other spaces like classrooms, workplaces, interpersonal relationships, and our own brain. We'll also work on ways to reframe or resist these biases. Individualism assumes that mental health, identity, and growth are located within the person, in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviours, rather than in their relationships or social context. Capitalism assumes that perpetual growth is both possible and desirable, that human value is tied to economic contribution and that productivity is a measure of health. Saviorism assumes people need to be fixed, saved, or rescued by professionals, authorities, or experts, and that people cannot be trusted to be experts on their own experience. Neuronormativity assumes that there is one correct or normal way for brains to function or process, and any other way of thinking or being is a deficit or dysfunction. Saneism assumes that rational, controlled, and consistent ways of thinking and feeling are inherently superior, and that those who deviate from these norms are disordered, dangerous, or less fully human. Behaviorism assumes humans can be conditioned through reinforcement, rewards, and punishments, and that improving behavioral control is the same as improving mental health. Mind-body dualism assumes the mind and body are separate, that thinking, not feeling, is the essence of humanity, and that the body and emotions must be controlled by the cognitive mind. Materialism assumes that reality is only physical matter, that nothing is real unless it can be measured, quantified, and observed through physical means. Scientism assumes double-blind, peer-reviewed study is the only way to know truth, while discrediting emotional, spiritual, artistic, or intuitive ways of knowing. Note, this list is from the course outline, so it's not currently open for debate or edits. If you disagree, feel free to make your own list. More info here, and the address is given at Trauma Geek.
I want to say, here's what I think. For the rest of my life, I'd love to say this list is from the course outline, so it's not currently open for debate or edits. If you disagree, feel free to make your own list. I find it's a nice way to end something. Now, I'm not minimizing what she says because I think it's entirely interesting, but I have a tendency to say things like, I often end up off with, or something, or I'm not sure, or you might not agree. So I like that finality, and I found a lot of value. I found it very interesting.
So these things listed are seen as biases in the therapy situation.
Yeah. I think we're supposed to believe that when we go into therapy or when we go into asking for help from trained professionals, that we're in a safe space without judgment and that we are being encouraged to open ourselves and make ourselves entirely vulnerable. But the point seems to be being made is that the therapist is a human being too, and a human being lives in a context, and the context, however much they try to transcend these biases, means that they hold these biases all the way through. So they will make judgments according to whether you are economically active or not, and that will be noticeable to you perhaps. Or you might see them as somebody that occasionally looks to be somebody who attempts to create a fix for you, a different way of being, rather than allowing you to explore it yourself. So I think it's a warning about biases, and it's a warning about how therapists might look to themselves to try and, as much as they can, transcend these things. But surely, in reality, these biases are so inherent to the human experience, or these things are so inherent to the human experience, it's impossible to remove the bias from the situation. It's something that stops me ever going towards a therapist or recommending a therapist.
I think this kind of indicates that there's a yearning sometimes in some people in the community for another experience that doesn't contain these biases. And that's what they're looking for, hunting for almost. So when they're in these situations, they want to promote an environment and communication where these things aren't dominant. They want to question them, challenge them even. So that, I think, is okay. But it can also lead to a negative thing I've experienced, which is like you won't be entirely honest in these situations in your communication, maybe consciously or unconsciously, because these things aren't your way of being. And so when confronted with them, you will just say what is required, do what is required to just get through it sometimes. So I think it can lead you to another type of understanding, which is like, where are you in relationship to these things in therapy, say, or in living your life even? And how much are you engaged in challenging it or succumbing to it?
Well, that's the last post that we're looking at today. And for those of you who are missing Harry's lovely Scottish accent, he will be back next week. And the rest of us will continue to meet up at the 444 every Sunday, 4:44 p.m. here UK time. And you are welcome to listen in to that or drop in. You can find the link on our website. So that's everything here from us today. Thank you to all those people who have posted those things, and thank you for everybody who has taken part in today's discussions. Normally, I would go through the progress that we're making here at Autistic Radio and Autistic Association, the charity that we formed as autistic people to represent ourselves. So I will remind the group that tomorrow we have the culmination, the end of what feels to me quite a long process when we were trying to help out an autism charity that provides support for young people who have dropped out of school, possibly become a problem to the authorities, the society around them, maybe their family, things just not going very well in their world. And this charity reaches out with programs to try to act as some kind of go-between between maybe the school board, maybe the parents, and the child themselves. The issue for most people is that the professionals in that charity base their knowledge on the new science that they call behavioural science. And behavioural science has a very poor track record over the previous decades when it's been implemented in different parts of the world. And to some extent, behavioural science still carries those difficult issues. There's a mismatch between what autistic people would like to see as positive and what some of the professionals out there feel are positive. So from our point of view, as a completely autistic group, it's a controversial thing to be doing. We do it, though, hoping that something that we say will make a change and make a difference in the way that these professionals behave around other autistic people. We can't do it directly. The only thing we can hope to do is to change some of the thoughts and minds and inform with our own lived experience the professionals out there who are using what they feel to be the golden bullet. So tomorrow we will, for the last time, meet up with this group, and we hope that it won't just be myself representing the organisation. I hope that perhaps some of the other main people, the main instigators here, will come along with me. I'll feel very lonely and very exposed if it's just myself. I wonder if anybody is planning to at this point, but I won't put them on the spot and ask them to speak out loud. The thing that we have every Sunday, reliably, is Harry's live broadcast, where Harry goes through some of the posts that he shares on the autisticradio.com Facebook page. It's an important thing to see what other people are saying and then see whether we have maybe slightly different feelings or similar feelings to the people who post these things on social media. Using other people's thoughts and then commenting on them can sometimes make people feel as though they're being criticized or they're being told that it's wrong in some way. But that's not our intention here. Our intention here is to use the inspiration from what people say to then bring out our own thoughts as a group, so that you, the listener, the people out there in different parts of the world, might frame your own thoughts around. Disagree with us, agree with us, do something, but explore this world of autism that we have to try and manage for ourselves. We can't just wait for other people to tell us how we should think. We form it for ourselves. Spectrum Voices Conversation is an Autistic Association production for autisticradio.com. If you have something to share with us, if you need a voice, you can make different kinds of programs with us. You can make a 10-minute short, or you can join us for a podcast to talk about a subject that is dear to your heart or something you think needs a wider audience. We have an open door policy for divergent views. We do not necessarily agree with everything that we share on our Facebook pages or the words expressed in our podcast. There are a lot of different divergent views which we are trying to allow get aired so that people can see things from different people's vantage points. We hope that you will join that conversation. Contact us through any of our links, Facebook, by email, directly to us.